with Robert Mabbett, Engagement Director at Better Change, focusing on safer gambling and reduction of gambling-related harm. Hi, Robert. It's very good to see you here.
Hi, Denise. It's great to be here, and what a fantastic show here in Barcelona we've got.
Absolutely. Robert, you've been a strong advocate for safer and responsible gambling, and you've been criticizing both regulators and the industry itself. Can you tell us why you choose a career focusing on making gambling safer while emphasizing practical and really rational solutions?
I started out in the betting industry as an operator working on the front line in retail betting shops in and around the north of the UK. And one of my first observations working in that environment was the customer service needed to improve. We needed to do a better job in terms of the customer experience. We needed to learn about the behaviors of the clients so that we could give them a really good experience, in the betting shops. And a lot of that would mean interacting, talking with clients, and now and again, occasionally the conversation would turn to safety gambling if someone was having issues or we wanted to interact with their way of playing. I found it a lot easier to have those conversations if we already had a good relationship and trust with those customers, and actually found that you could get some positive outcomes of that people would take heed of their advice, or indeed we could hear their methods of staying in control. A couple of years down the road, through personal circumstances, I lost both of my parents to addiction, and we had a suicide in the family, a young member. So I wanted to learn about mental health. Why did this happen? It was a traumatic event for everyone in the family. So unbelievably, I was at an event like this, and I met with some of the safer gambling organisations. It was very early on, and spoke to the team at Gordon Moody. And a few months later, a role came up at Gordon Moody for an operational manager for their international helpline. So I applied for this role, got it, which was unbelievable. And it gave me the opportunity to work with some of the most severely affected disordered gamblers in the UK, and also enhance my understanding of addictions, of mental health, and how to help people whilst we're still in the subject matter of gambling. For 50 years, Gordon Moody have been running rehabs in the UK, one of the oldest gambling treatment organisations. So I took a wealth of knowledge from that, and was speaking to the team at Better Change, who emphasise positive play, customer interactions, being proactive, being sort of on the side of the consumer and trying to meet their needs. And I was at one end being an operator, I've gone to the other end being in sort of that addictions treatment, and I found here was where I could make a really positive change. There is a lot of innovation around safer gambling. There are a lot of products, there's a lot of policy and a lot of talk, especially in the UK. But what I'm passionate about is what can we do that engages the consumer and that actually makes a difference and works.
Absolutely. First of all, I'm sorry for your loss, and second of all, you're doing a great job. You mentioned also the importance of gambling literacy.
Yes.
Could you explain what this concept means in practice and how it helps enhancing gambling safety?
There are a million different ways to place a bet, to have a gamble, whether that be lotto, whether it be bingo, sports betting, online, casino, you name it. And within each of those products, there's different ways to place a bet. You might bet single numbers in roulette. You might spread across the table, play red, play black. You might play slots of different stakes, speed. A million different ways. How much does the customer understand in terms of the level of risk, stake versus prizes, chances of winning? We need to explore that so that consumers of gambling can find a level of play that they're happy with. They're confident, they understand the rules in the product, they get the most enjoyment because they're playing at the level that they're comfortable with. And that, in my eyes, enhances the customer experience and therefore makes gambling safer. We would always have a better experience with our clients when I was an operator, when we explained how the bets worked. And a lot of that was, horse racing. It's not really like a difficult code, but it has its own way, and people didn't necessarily understand it straight away. So we would break down what multiple bets were, what single bets, what an each way bet would be, how to read form. Hopefully that would give them a better experience, but also allow them to bet in a more, responsible is the word, but a sensible way. It was about transparency for me
Absolutely.
and customer service.
What suits them the most?
Yeah, absolutely.
In terms of betting. Yeah.
Everyone consumes gambling differently, so it's finding a way. Without gambling literacy, someone's form of gambling can very quickly become volatile because they're playing in a way that is high risk. They might be chasing losses, so they might be 20, 30, 100 pounds in the hole, so they might increase their stake and increase the odds to try and quickly return that money. But of course, by doing that, they're lowering their chances of getting a reward. So that the probability is that they're going to get deeper into the hole. We want to educate people so that they can make decisions not to do that, rather than what we see at the minute, which is where someone hits a limit and then bang, betting ends, you've hit a limit and it stops. And that customer then goes away with a pretty unsatisfactory experience, and there's also a risk there in terms of gambling harm.
My question is, how can consumers determine if they're gambling literate versus illiterate? Where's the line in that?
I think what's really important to understand is that gambling literacy isn't whether you win more or not.
Absolutely.
You know, it's still a game of chance. There is still odds. It's still probably in a house's favour. Gambling literacy is to make people, give people confidence, empowering people. So I guess it's the same with driving and things like that. Everyone thinks they're an amazing driver, right? but we still have accidents on the road and all the rest of it. But what we do is we educate people. They have to pass tests. They have to have a driving license. They use a seatbelt. There's airbags in the car. There's cameras and sensors for parking, everything like that. We do to enhance their knowledge of driving, the knowledge of the vehicle, the knowledge of the road. And we need to do the same with gambling. It's not necessarily all about gambling safety. It's about enhancing their knowledge of gambling so they're comfortable and they're making the decisions. And I always think that's important, because that's when someone feels empowered to make their own decisions, then they're more likely to stick with those decisions. If you impose restrictions and tell someone not to do it, I don't like getting told what to do. I want to do the other thing. So it's about empowering and sharing knowledge. There isn't like a bar or an exam they have to pass, but imparting any of that knowledge will raise the bar in gambling literacy. But I have to stress again, it's not about how to win more money at gambling. That's not the angle.
Absolutely. You've discussed concept of gambling volatility. Could you elaborate on that and why you believe it's crucial for a safer gambling industry as a whole?
Absolutely. When I talk about gambling volatility, it's how risky the behavior of that gambling could be. And from a safer gambling point of view, it can happen where if someone is potentially chasing losses, as we've discussed,
yes,
they could play at a higher volatility, higher odds, quicker speed to try and regain those losses. But actually what they're doing is decreasing the probability of them actually getting a win and potentially causing more harm. On the other side of it, people seek a bit of a thrill when they're gambling. It's supposed to be exciting. And let's have an
entertainment. Yeah,
absolutely. And let's have an open conversation about risk. So if something is very low volatility, very low spend, then you've got a great safe product, but it's boring. And people aren't going to play it, you know. So if you had a slot game, but you could only play it between 7 and 8 o'clock, 3 spins once a week, people wouldn't engage with it because it's dull. So what we need to find is that balance. And people might seek a slightly more risky way of playing. Millions and millions of people play national lotteries. They might risk £1, €1 on tickets, but the odds are astronomical. Millions and millions and millions to one. It's crazy risky, but it's very low stake. And people are comfortable with that. They're quite knowledgeable that, yes, we'll never win it, but everyone's got that conversation. Everyone has the 6 lucky numbers. So an open and transparent conversation about volatility. Some people might want a thrill, a short period of play, but high risk, high excitement. Some people might fall into making their products more volatile or playing them in a more volatile way to chase losses, and that's what we need to detect and be able to act upon from a safer gambling point of view.
Even though you've shown a clear focus on consumers, you've also been vocal about regulatory decisions that lack actual factual recognition. Do you believe present-day regulators may be trying to please the gambling critics without adequately considering factual data?
I think that's a really accurate statement. I think that's a really, and it frustrates me. I have been vocal and I have been critical, but that is because I want good regulation. I want safer gambling strategies. player protection to be effective. I want it to actually help people. Now, from a political lobbying point of view, especially in the UK, we've had a very strong agenda pushed by a very small minority of people. And sometimes the debate has become toxic. And sometimes the talk around things like suicidality and stuff isn't factual. And it's there and it's emotionally charged and it's there to influence the regulatory bodies, to regulate government. That's not right. And I applauded the Gambling Commission in the UK recently for speaking out about that and making sure that we represent the data and the facts accurately, because that's the only way we're going to push the debate forward. Let's be transparent. On the flip side of things, we need regulation, good organizations, a healthy industry for the benefit of those who consume gambling. If you put all these things in place, but it doesn't engage with the player, they will not use them. Therefore, it's moot. And that is kind of where we get to in that appeasement tick box. We're doing this, we're doing that. But is it actually working? And I challenge myself as well as we challenge the sector, as well as we challenge the regulators. Let's do things that work. Let's show our working out, and let's provide the evidence and show that actually this is an industry committed to a great customer experience and an experience that is safe.
How would you sum it up? Like, can we address the problem of one side misusing or misunderstanding data when making decisions that are important?
I think it's really important that the Gambling Commission also have realised that some of their data hasn't been as robust or maybe painted as accurate a picture as it should do, and they're working on new surveying. I think it's important that we invest in research, and I know that through regulatory settlements, various voluntary payments, a lot of that goes into the research, education, treatment of gambling. I think it's important that we maybe drop the argument that any industry funding used to fund research means that the research is going to be biased. I think that's a little bit unfair to research professionals who are just doing their job. So the big thing, obviously, is that we see the results of this research, we see the results of this data, we clearly explain what it means and what action it should then inform. Because as a big fan of research, it's all great as long as it leads to some action and informs us, organisations like ourselves who work in harm prevention, on what are the best ways to move forward for the safety of those who consume gambling.
Do you believe the gambling industry has a genuine incentive to educate consumers about gambling literacy and volatility, or do most companies only act when pushed by regulators, and that's why regulators are so important?
The latter will always have to happen. And it's important that the regulators are strong, but it has to be collaborative. We have to work with people, not do to people. We've got to get that engagement. I do think the industry are proactive. Over the last 5 years, when we've seen a huge increase in the funding made available for research, education, treatment, prevention, we've seen some amazing innovation from the industry, from academics, from clinical professionals, and sometimes that stuff doesn't actually reach the service and it doesn't get to work because sometimes it breaks down. Sometimes there's other commercial activities the industry needs to focus on. I think what's really important, again, and I keep talking about it, always bring that consumer in mind. Always bring the experience of your customer in mind. So I believe good safer gambling practices can sit alongside commercial activities. I think retention of customers is really important. Obviously, we see a lot of people here at these exhibitions that are just acquisition, but we need to see the sustainability of the industry, and that retention of consumers gives someone a great experience and they'll maybe use your product for life. So it makes business sense for the gambling industry to take an interest in it. I believe they do. Sometimes I believe they're maybe shut out of the conversation sometimes because it gets sort of hijacked by the small minority that are very loud. But I do think it happens, and I do see it out there, and I encourage it.
What steps do you think are necessary to make gambling industry safer? Is it going to take regulatory pressure or companies' own commitment, or something that, as you put, just working alongside one another?
There has to be evidence that commercially providing that great experience and a safe experience works. Otherwise, the various elements of the industry, they're not going to fully engage. So rather than having safer gambling as a separate thing, we want to integrate it. We want to integrate it with marketing. We want to integrate it with product development. We want to integrate it with customer experience, interactions, and various things, so that it runs consistently through the industry operations, rather than being a bolt-on at the end. And again, there will always have to be a regulatory push for various aspects, because as much as I'm talking about early interventions of harm, as much as I'm talking about gambling harm prevention and such like, there will always need to be a provision from limit setting, taking a break, self-exclusion, access to support services and care. There will always need to be a provision for those people who need to stop gambling and need help. So, the regulators and various government bodies and such like will always have to push to make sure that those avenues are available for people in genuine difficulty. But I think we also need to make the attractive proposition to the industry around, give a great customer service. That means taking care of their welfare too.
What are the key challenges in ensuring our efforts to enhance gambling safety are successful?
I think they're twofold. They kind of come from both ends of the spectrum. I think, as I've previously mentioned, we have to evidence the benefit commercially of running a responsible, a safe operation. I also think that there is a danger of over-regulation here. And as I've mentioned before, we have a very strong narrative from a small section of people. And I'm not saying this voice shouldn't be heard. It absolutely should. But it is not the only voice. And it's a very emotive voice that is quite anti-gambling. You can't effectively govern gambling from a standpoint of being anti-gambling.
Yeah.
And it sounds kind of obvious, but, people who've been harmed, there are a lot of people who are quite angry, and they say, but we need to understand that journey so that we can make gambling safer. We need to understand that journey so that we can educate people on recovery and treatment and various avenues to support when people need that. But it shouldn't be the only voice when you're talking about governing the whole aspect of gambling. And there is no one strong voice. We need a voice from the operators. We need a voice from the regulators. We need a voice from lived experience of people, both who have had gambling harm, but also lived experience of people who have gambled and they haven't actually been harmed, who enjoy gambling. We need to hear that voice too. And although it's the majority of people, it's a very, very quiet voice at the minute. And that's what we want to represent at Better Change. We need to hear from people like yourselves in the media and such like, who provide commentary on gambling. I think the industry press, who give a commentary on all aspects of the gambling industry, is very different to, say, the national press, who will zone in on stories that are very emotional, very negative. I think we need to show from a recruitment point of view that gambling, the industry, is a great place to work. Look where we are now. We're in the middle of Barcelona. We're having a great time with great people talking about the issues that affect our industry. I've worked in the industry for over a decade now, and I want to carry on because it's a great place to work. There's great careers here and great futures. And I think if we bring great people into the industry, we'll also provide a better experience for those who consume gambling. So every single aspect, everybody under this roof here today needs to come together in that conversation around, how gambling is regulated and how it's consumed by its customers. I mean, there is no singular more important voice in this debate.
Absolutely. Finally, what words of encouragement do you have for those working to make gambling safer but are maybe frustrated by the slow progress? Are there more reasons for optimism or pessimism?
Yes, there are. But I'm a glass half full guy, so I'm always going to say, but you have to. And, when you say, the frustration of the slow burn and all the rest of it, the words of advice I would have is keep going. You're doing a great job. Now, we might not move the needle much in any given time. We may not make gambling completely safe overnight. That's not how it works. But every hard-earned yard is a triumph and it's a victory. I've seen some great initiatives in the last 5 years working in the safer gambling space, technological advances, various different projects, various different ways of approaching safer gambling. And they don't work overnight. And it might take 3-4 years for them to actually start to go through. But that's what we want to see. I remember when Casino Guru first mentioned global self-exclusion. That's going to take a long time, but we're still having conversations and we are further on than where we were before. And it needs passion, it needs confidence, and it needs that continued drive. If we give up every time it's hard, right, then it's never going to happen. But the hard yards, that's what we're doing. We're making them inch by inch by inch. But every year, gambling gets safer. I'm convinced about that.
Oh, what a lovely message. Well, that's all from me. Thank you very much. And we'll be in touch.